As a kid growing up in the 90s, I feel like I got to experience the peak of that whole VHS era, and in particular, the influx of super violent, mature-themed anime that got released in Australia. Most of which, as a kid, I probably shouldn't have been watching. Things like Ninja Scroll, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, and Madball 34. All chock full of gorgeous, hand-drawn animation, graphic violence, and badass main characters. And it's kind of weird to think too that that's a vibe that's just not that common to see in gaming, especially when it comes to first-person shooters. Well, that's all about to change with the upcoming Mullet Mad Jack, a fast-paced shooter that feels like a combination of post-Void and everything great about late 80s and early 90s anime, where you play as a seriously buff dude sporting an outright impressive Mississippi mudflap. Yeah man, this guy's all business in the front, party in the back. And it's a scientific fact that mullets make someone approximately about 300% more manlier. Just ask Solid Snake, Macho Man Randy Savage, or Jerry Seinfeld.
It's not a purse, it's European!
Now before I get started, I do want to make it clear that this isn't a sponsored video. I mean, that should be obvious, but I'm not being paid by the devs to talk about this, and I'm not receiving any kind of kickback either. I was just lucky enough to get a sneak peek at the alpha build that they're releasing on Steam pretty soon. And it was just one of those instances where I played something that was so much fun that all I wanted to do was share it with other people. I mean, about the only thing I'd ever promote for money here is your mum's OnlyFans page.
How sick is that?
Right, so anyway, Mullet Mad Jack takes place in the 90s, 2090 to be precise, and you're playing as the eponymous character, just out driving around in his red muscle car, which is in no way a homage to Kanada's bike from Akira. In the future, man and the internet have somehow become fused together, and you're playing as a so-called moderator with the task of having to rescue a princess.
Today's mission? To rescue the influencer princess from the robot scum!
With the princess in question being a social media personality who's been kidnapped by rogue cyborgs. Classic. So you're tasked with having to rescue her from moving floor to floor in this large corporate building, and dealing with all these hostile robots along the way. And at a time when AI art is everywhere and becoming increasingly more commonplace, well, there's never been a better time to go around violently murdering machines. I'm doing my part.
Sounds like you passed the test!
The catch to all of this is that you've only got 10 seconds to live because your health is constantly being drained, and the only way to keep this stocked up is to kill enemies as quickly as possible, which injects your blood with dopamine.
Your blood feels the sweet, sweet flavor of those lights!
Yeah, because you see, your entire rampage is being live streamed, and likes from viewers are the only thing that keeps you alive here.
Ready? Go moderate these damn robots!
You ever see that movie Crank? Yeah, well, it's kinda like that, only with less public fornication. And I mean, does that really seem that far-fetched? I mean, if you think about it, we're only in 2023, and we've already got brain-dead TikTokers walking around in strangers' homes just to get likes these days. So is it really that insane to think that 67 years later that this same subculture would devolve to such an extreme?
You're harvesting your death data to improve our weapon ads.
Visually too, Mullet Mad Jack is just a really awesome looking game. Runs on the Unity engine with that very familiar combination of 2D sprites for weapons and enemies along with 3D modeling for the environments. All of the artwork in the game is hand-drawn and absolutely gorgeous stuff, really capturing that vibe from that era in Japanese animation where the sight of someone having a sharp metal object put through their head was pretty much the standard. The UI skates that thin line between being believably packed with lots of meaningless shit, which really epitomizes the absolutely god-awful culture that surrounds live streaming, but then it also manages to be minimalistic enough during actual gameplay so it doesn't hinder your progress. The best bits are all those little cinematics, like the opening sequence showing Jack driving around in his car, and if you wait a bit on the main menu, you get this awesome loop of him also just cruising around the city, which could almost be like the background image on one of those 8-hour or so long chill videos that you'd see on YouTube. And look man, it's a well-known fact of life that the late 80s and early 90s car aesthetic is easily one of the best of all time. And it's all just been captured flawlessly here. It's also chock full of little Easter eggs and references which you might not have noticed at first, but your brain did.
They're the same picture.
Now, much like Post Void, it's all about getting through the floors as fast as possible, with a weapon in your right hand and your health displayed on an item in the left. In Post Void, it was that weird little shrunken idol thing. And the other main difference here too is that Mullet Mad Jack doesn't give me a goddamn seizure and make me want to projectile vomit across my desk. Plus, I can also easily visually gauge how much time I've got left here, compared to that idol in Post Void, which just kinda got lost in that sea of obnoxious visual effects. I'd also kind of compare it to Hotline Miami 2 with the whole fast-paced approach to the gameplay, the high lethality of enemies, the soundtrack, plus the mechanic of kicking down doors, mixed with the whole 80s and 90s vibe they've got going on with the visuals. In fact, there's even that upcoming indie FPS called Angerfoot, which is also in a similar vein, where you seem to be playing as someone who has a serious grudge against closed doors, going around kicking them down and killing countless bad guys along the way. Either way, though, Mullet Mad Jack's got that very similar premise of just go fast, kill shit, try not to die, and then repeat. And that's pretty much the best way to sum up the basic loop to combat. Each floor begins with you starting out on the elevator, you then move in a more or less forward direction, killing everything in your path as quickly as possible, to try to keep your health topped up and make it to the end before time runs out.
What are you buying?
Along with drinking copious amounts of soda along the way, which also restores your health. In fact, so much soda that I'm hoping those dopamine shots are also in line with insulin. Once you make it to the end of a floor, you can choose from 1 of 3 upgrades, and this is where the addiction really starts to take hold. Because not only can you swap through the 4 available weapons, but you can also choose various player upgrades as well.
Peace Corp wishes you a good day!
Like there's an upgrade so that drinking soda allows you to dual wield weapons, or even one that turns those empty soda cans into grenades.
See you in health, candy boys!
Throughout all the floors are fire extinguishers, and yeah, look, anyone who's played enough FPS games knows that those things may as well be red barrels. And there's an upgrade here too, which makes them freeze enemies when they explode. One super important upgrade even slows time down when you've only got a few seconds of life left, which really kind of helps you clutch victory back from the jaws of defeat. So yeah, dog, there's a whole lot of experimentation here with all this randomization, and truly no 2 runs are ever going to be the same. It's like a combination of the Doomslayer mixed with a 2090s version of John Wick. Yeah, and the good parts of John Wick 2. Not the boring bits where dudes with ambiguous European accents sit around in expensive looking rooms eating fancy food.
It's true, but he shouldn't say it.
Now, being an early alpha build, there's not all that much content to get through, and you can probably easily beat the whole thing in about 20 to 30 minutes. Currently, there's 2 chapters with 10 floors on each, and then a boss fight at the end of both of them, neither of which are all that challenging. If you die before you reach the 10th floor, you only have to restart the current chapter, not the entire run, which at least has some degree of fairness to it. But the normal difficulty mode is pretty damn easy here, so I'd probably recommend that when people finally play this thing, that they bump it right up to hard mode. It'll not only be more interesting that way and actually offer up some degree of resistance, but it really also forces you to become more acclimatized to the mechanics. In this current version of the game too, there's 4 main weapons: the revolver, the katana, the shotgun, and the SMG. You always start off with a revolver, and that's kind of handy because this is a pretty effective and useful weapon which can outright carry you throughout the entire game. Headshots are an instant kill against most enemies, and you can even get an upgrade for this to add an ammo belt to it, which means you don't even ever need to reload it, at which point it's pretty much just GG. It's just a weapon that rewards players who have decent accuracy, and it makes the majority of the game here a bit of a cakewalk. The katana, on the other hand, is a little bit trickier to use, requiring you to be neck and neck with someone to actually hit them, you know, because it's a melee weapon and all. Most enemies still die in a single hit though, and then for the upgrade for this thing, it actually gives it fire damage, which burns enemies over time. Either way, the katana's a bit of a double-edged sword, no pun intended, because you've really got to close the gap with this thing before you can hit someone, and on hard mode, that's almost kind of a death wish at times. But for the edgelord who spent all his time studying the blade while everyone else was out partying, well then this is the weapon of choice.
Are you fuckboys out there trying to talk shit against me?
Then finally after that, we've got the shotgun and the SMG. Now the shotgun's more or less just like a more powerful version of the revolver, obviously, requiring the player to be a bit more closer to make it more effective, and it'll often kill the standard enemies again in a single hit. But it's at its worst during these sections where you're sliding down these walkways because you can't really hit enemies until you're right on top of them. And again, holding off on killing someone on hard mode is more or less just giving the game an extra opportunity to kill you. On the flip side though, the upgrade for the shotgun turns it into a double-barreled super shotgun. Classic. And you know what? I genuinely can't think of a single thing worth complaining about here. I don't know, maybe apart from the fact that you're reliant on the RNG to actually unlock this. Still though, this thing does its job more than well enough, sending all those rogue AI programs straight to the recycle bin and straight to robot hell. Then at last we've got the submachine gun, which is modelled after a MAC-10. Yeah, arguably one of the best submachine guns to put in a first-person shooter, after the Uzi 9mm, of course.
The Uzi 9mm?
And this thing is kinda like a faster firing but weaker hitting version of the revolver, with the main drawback being that insane amount of kickback you get when firing it, to the point that I would honestly consider this weapon a bit of a handicap. I mean, I was able to beat the alpha build consistently with the shotgun and the revolver, but I haven't been able to beat it once with the submachine gun, and I think the main reason for that is just that amount of recoil that it has. But you know what? A lot of these minor issues don't really matter all that much when you're in the swing of things, and the weapons almost kind of play like a 60-40 ratio to the combat, when you combine it with the various other ways that you can kill enemies. So you've got a dash and a kick move, both bound to the shift and the right mouse button by default, and these can be put to good use in a few ways. I mean, apart from just using it to move short distances more quickly, you can also kick enemies into nearby fans or exposed electrical panels. You can quickly slide through ventilation shafts, and if someone's standing on the other side of one of these things and you hit it, then they'll get knocked backwards and pancake into a nearby wall. There's also melee weapons lying around the area as well, like knives, axes, and hammers, all of which can be used for instant melee takedowns. One time I even saw Jack kill someone in a bar with a book. With a fucking book. These melee kills are actually kind of important too, because not only do they magically make you invulnerable to all surrounding damage, which gives you a bit of breathing room, but it also refills your entire health bar in a single attack. So there's definitely like a bit of strategy here in holding onto these things and using them when you're really up shit creek. I just think it's kind of a weird move that they're both bound to the same button as the kick and the dash move, which means you often use them when you're not really intending to. Now, if all you were doing here was running from room to room and killing the same 2 or 3 enemies over and over, well, yeah, that'd get boring pretty quickly and be about as exciting as watching ice melt. But the simple aspect that makes it all so addictive is that whole ADHD aspect and that constant need to get through the floors as quickly as possible. Which, yeah, is kind of ironic too for a game where the entire premise is about your character staying alive by getting constant injections of dopamine. Then as soon as you make it to the end of the floor and get one of those upgrades, it makes you just want to get back in there and do the whole thing all over again. The randomness of the upgrades, which is always changing from floor to floor, also preys on that hopeless addiction to gambling that I think everyone suffers to some extent. And then when you combine it all with this really appealing, colourful, and not to mention gratuitously violent art style, well, it makes it even trickier to put it down. Just one of those games where you keep telling yourself that you'll just do one more run, just one more run, right? But then the next thing you know, you've done 10 runs. I also love the fact too that a run only takes you like 20 or so minutes, and even just playing the game for a couple of runs and seeing how far it can get, even in this version of the game that still has so little content, well, it really shows the potential for how addictive the full version's gonna be.
Peace Corps wishes you a good and violent day!
Still though, you can definitely see some areas where they could improve things and add in a few new mechanics and features, and it would be a pretty boring video if all I did here was suck on the game's nutsack. I think the most obvious thing they need to add in here are guns. Lots of guns.
Guns. Lots of guns.
Weapons like grenade or rocket launchers would be kind of awesome, and I think an automatic shotgun too, like an AA-12 or something, would also fit in really well. Maybe even an item that speeds up your movement could add a new aspect to the playthroughs. I know that grappling hooks are kind of played out at this point, but in a game like this, it might actually be really effective, letting you close the distance on enemies and get through those levels even faster. That's also something that might make the katana a lot more viable. I think alternate routes would also offer up a lot more replayability as well, and really break up the tedium of just moving mostly in a straight line the entire time. You ever played that game Dead Link? Well, it had this whole thing where at the end of each arena, you could choose from 3 different routes to take to get to the next area. And it'd make the game easier or harder depending on which way you wanted to go, with the harder options offering up better rewards, but just at a higher risk of possibly being killed. And yeah, something like this might offer up a few more replay options for Mullet Mad Jack. Currently too, there's only 2 bosses in the game, and both of these are just laughably easy right now, so I'm really hoping that both of these guys get a serious buff in the future as well. Either way though, at the end of the day, Mullet Mad Jack isn't going to reinvent the wheel, but it doesn't really need to. It's just one of those really fun and competent shooters that understands the assignment and knows what to do with it. And I mean, damn dog, sometimes all you want to do is just run from room to room in a bright, neon-coloured dystopia, shooting cyborgs in the face with a revolver or stabbing them through the head with a goddamn fire axe. In a game that not only effortlessly captures that anime aesthetic that it's going for, but also just effortlessly captures the feeling of having a good fucking time.
Oh, don't wait until you're a cold corpse.
At a time when a lot of AAA games seem to be consistently disappointing, at least there's still hope here with the indie scene. And if more people want to take a stab at making hand-drawn, violent, and fast-paced shooters like this, I won't be complaining.
Thank you!
So if this sounds like something up your alley, well then make sure to wishlist the game on Steam and follow those devs on Twitter.
Thank you for playing our alpha build.